At Sight and Scene, we feature the innovators, disruptors, and changemakers using reality capture technology to drive real impact. These are the people who saw a problem, challenged the status quo, and took action, whether restoring ecosystems, improving resilience, or transforming infrastructure.
They bring a deep sense of responsibility and stewardship to their work, leveraging technologies like drones, laser scanning, GIS, and mapping to create meaningful change. More than just experts, they're storytellers, sharing their journeys and the why behind their work. Our mission is to amplify their voices, educate, and inspire others to push boundaries and take action.
Sight and Scene.
That's how we started developing, these underwater mosaics. So now we can get really good detail and be able to detect, even disease, and we can see how the coral reef's doing, even going down to the polyp level.
Cool.
Because if you're close enough to the reef and you have a good enough camera, you can build these underwater 3D mosaics that are just phenomenal for understanding the rugosity of the coral, the health. If there's predators, like we can detect things like fireworms and really understand, what's going on at a whole nother level from where we were with the drone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sight and Scene. Today, we have a really exciting guest with us, and we're super excited to bring him into our virtual studio here. And we'll get to introducing Steve Schill here in just a second. But Scott, how are you today?
Good. I'm happy it's finally feeling like spring here, so that's a big deal for us. It's been a long winter in New York, so happy about that.
How was it? I mean, was it a nasty one? Because
It was. I think more that we've been lucky with a lot of mild winters, and so this was our first like real winter in a while. So it's not that it was colder than usual; it's just that it was the coldest we've had in a while. So.
Yeah. Well, here in Portland, we obviously it rains a lot, but we welcome the rain because the rain usually means snow in the mountains, and the snow in the mountains means we got this big battery of moisture up there that helps stave off forest fires in the late summer and fall. So we're always excited. It's what makes it so beautiful here. So super super excited for spring though, all at the same time. So any new developments on your front here before we jump into introducing Steve, just on the work front?
Yeah, not too much. We're in between a few projects right now. I think the biggest one that is New York Build is coming up, so I'll probably have more to say on that on our next episode. That's just a big AEC conference that happens in New York City every year. So try to attend that, see what's up. But that's to be continued on that.
Yeah, same on my end. It seems like people are gearing up for the summer season here. So getting lots of interest, some calls, but yeah, it's kind of nice these in between moments where we can collect our thoughts and work on our business development and just have some time and space to think about things. And I enjoy that aspect of just having. I think it's so important for us to have space in our day to day just to reflect on things, because I don't think we do enough of that in our hustle culture of just taking a step back and really thinking about things. So all good stuff. Okay, well, yeah, we're super excited, and in particular, I'm really excited just because I have spent a ton of time down in the Caribbean. It holds a special place in my heart, and Steve is doing some amazing work down there. So today we have Steve Schill. Am I saying your last name correctly?
Yeah,
Steve?
That's right.
Okay. Growing up in Monterey, California, Steve was inspired at an early age to protect the oceans. After completing a PhD at the University of South Carolina in environmental remote sensing, he began his career with the Nature Conservancy in 2003 and is currently the lead scientist for TNC's Caribbean division. Prior to working with TNC, he was a project manager for a NASA-affiliated research center, developing innovative uses of remote sensing technology for commercial interest. In his current role, he works with 17 Caribbean countries and territories on expanding marine protection and strengthening management capacity. In particular, Steve is passionate about coral reefs, seagrass beds, and mangrove forests, and develops new techniques for mapping and monitoring these important coastal habitats. He's always on the lookout for new technology that can help us better understand the benefits these habitats provide to people. Steve is an adjunct professor in the Department of Geography at Brigham Young and a research associate at the Center for Global Discovery and Conservation Science at Arizona State University. Dang,
Cool.
man.
Yo.
So excited to have you on,
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah.
How are you?
Doing well. It's good to. It's always good to talk about conservation and communicating the need for all of us to care about helping our planet out. And
Indeed.
yeah, there's a lot that we all can do together. So I'm always anxious to get the word out.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And being at the Nature Conservancy since 2003, that's a long stint
Yeah.
of just knowing the inner workings of that agency and the issues at hand. How did you tell us a little more about yourself? Like how you got it? I mean, we talked about at the front, you were inspired in Monterey, but just maybe
Yeah,
give us a little more about your background, how you got into things, and
yeah.
um,
Well, I remember spending hours on the beaches in Monterey, and you know, going with my dad out in the sailboat. The whales, the kelp, the magic of the ocean was just really inspiring when I was growing up. And then I was always into maps. Uh,
mhm,
Maps. I collected maps. I was always studying maps, putting them on my wall. And then I had obviously a love of nature, and so throughout my collegiate years, I was trying to figure out how I could make maps, help nature, apply science. And when I was at the University of South Carolina, I worked very closely with a renowned remote sensing scientist, Dr. John Jensen, and he taught me a lot. We did a lot of work in the estuaries of South Carolina, and that's a really interesting place.
it is
The
beautiful there. Yeah.
interface between the land and the ocean. It's incredibly productive, and we were studying how to model the biomass of smooth cordgrass, and we were mapping oysters and
Uh-huh.
doing
Cool.
all sorts of neat things and getting stuck in the mud. And that's where I really got exposed to field work, and then I got this job after I finished up my graduate work, working with the Nature Conservancy. And I was hired originally to do the first what we call ecoregional assessment of the Caribbean Basin, and to really bring together all the GIS data layers and organize and use some of a lot of this was Landsat derived
Mm,
Right.
data. We were mapping beaches, we were trying to map coral and trying to understand, the distribution of the habitats, and at the same time understand the human footprint, because that's really important when you're trying to map intact areas. You're trying to understand where there are viable areas and where there are areas that are degraded. And so, my first 10 years with the Nature Conservancy, we developed some of the first base maps to understand where the important areas are to protect. And we worked with a lot of countries to actually declare their very first protected areas,
mm,
using science to guide that. So I work with a great team of, we have fundraisers, we have lawyers, we have scientists like me, we have marketing people, we have policy experts, we have social scientists. Conservation is so complex; it requires a team like that, and I've just been grateful to be able to be involved and have such a great run so far doing this. But there's a lot more to do.
That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. They are, I mean, a huge organization, and the Nature
Yeah.
Conservancy is massive footprint on the impact they're having around the planet. So we definitely want to hear more about that, but appreciate the diving in a little deeper. But before we get into our questions, we like to have a little fun fact segment each episode that brings in something fun about the region that you either came from or that we're discussing today, and what's the impact on it locally or globally, what impact did some of this information have. So I hear that you brought it, you did some research and you have a good one for us.
Well, I thought this would be an interesting fact. So imagine you're on top of a mountain,
Hmm.
and you're in the Caribbean, and the sun's coming up, and you get out of your tent, and you can see your breath, right? And you look out, and there's frost on the ground.
Mm.
Like, where am I? Where am I? Can you think of a place in the Caribbean? I know you've spent a lot of time there, but where, of all the places in the world, can you believe that there is a place in the Caribbean where you can wake up in the morning and you can see frost on the ground, and
Well,
you can see your breath?
I'm
I,
gonna guess Montserrat.
No,
no,
you want to guess, Scott?
I don't even have a guess. That you've already made me think about like other places. I'm like,
Yeah.
where in the Caribbean could that possibly be?
Well, on the island of Hispaniola, it's split by Haiti and Dominican Republic. There's Pico Duarte, and that was one of the first mountains I climbed in the Caribbean, and it is
Mm.
almost 10,000 feet high.
Wow.
Whoa.
And there's immense pine forests in Hispaniola, the Hispaniola pine, and during the months of like January to March, about this time of year, you can hike Pico Duarte, and you can have that experience of, it never snows there, but you can actually see frost on the ground,
Wow.
and have to put on a big coat to
Yeah.
climb and watch the sunrise go. So I always like to share that, like, the Caribbean has incredibly, not only culturally it's diverse, the environment, you've got really large deserts that people
Yeah.
don't think that there are deserts in the Caribbean. You've got these amazing seascapes, but then you've got these big mountains with pine forests and cold weather. So yeah,
Yeah.
Cool.
you
Cool.
you can have it all in the Caribbean.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Because, everyone thinks Caribbean vacation, right? I'm sure you run into everyone thinks it's all beach, end to end.
Yep,
But in
that's
fact,
exactly,
there's so
yeah,
much more diversity. That's really cool.
Yeah, playing off that point though, just the vacation vibe that people tend to have when they're thinking of the Caribbean. I actually lived in a ski town in Colorado, which it's a resort town too. So it's people come there, they always have this perception of this vibe. It's like everybody's here. It's just a party all the time. It's like, well, people live
yeah,
here. People
Right.
make their living here.
Mhm.
There's a culture about living in this place that it's you don't really see or you don't really fully appreciate it as a visitor. And I think you have to spend longer stints in these places and really open yourself up to getting to know the culture and getting to know the people and going off of the beaten path. So yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, gosh, I feel like I need to change my fun fact now. Because I was, I have been on a peak, but it was in Hawaii on the top of Haleakala on Maui,
Oh
where
wow.
you leave the beach and then you're up on the top and it's 40 degrees. You're like, what? This is Hawaii. This is crazy.
Yeah.
I was going to share just a quick story about some of my time in the Caribbean, and I shared a little bit of this in our warm up here. But I've been a lifelong swimmer. I swam competitively in college, and then after college, I competed nationally, and then I got into open water swimming, and that took me to lots of fun places and interesting places to do these big open water swims. I've swam across Lake Tahoe a couple times. I've been down in the Caribbean, and there was a swim that we did every year for like 3 years in a row in St. Croix. So there's an island off the northeast side of St. Croix called Buck Island, and it's actually a natural. It's a park, is it
National
not, Steve?
monument.
It's a
It's a national
national
monument.
monument, and it is. No one lives on this island. It is absolutely gorgeous. Like the underwater habitat there is incredible. But we would have all these boat captains would launch from the main shore of St. Croix and take all these swimmers. So there's like a flotilla, all these boats taking all these swimmers out to the tip of Buck Island, and that's where we started. And we'd cross the 1.5 mile channel, and then you would swim another 3.5 miles along the shore of St. Croix over all the coral reef, and just incredible experience. But the second year that I did it, there was quite a stiff wind, and I just remember coming out past the jetty. We're all on these boats, and you have all these people like hunkered down in these boats, and we get past the jetty, and these waves just start like practically coming over the bow of the boat. And I remember the captains just like grinning ear to ear, just looking at all us crazy swimmers, like, "Oh man, you guys are gonna have a rough ride out there." But Peter Gabriel's "Strawberry Hill" was playing, on the radio. He just had it blaring, and I just every time I hear that song now, I just think of that moment, seeing all the look on those people's faces as we got out past the jetty, and just a little bit of fear, a little bit of panic. Oh my gosh, this is going to be a rough swim. But man, gorgeous, gorgeous place, and oh man, I love the Caribbean.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's the called the buck to buck, right?
It was
Buck to buck, is
the
that what it's called?
because
Because
we
you're
did end at the Buccaneer. You're
yeah,
right,
you
and
swim
yeah,
from Buck Island to the Buccaneer.
yes, yeah, yeah, good fun.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
awesome. Well, mine is like way less interesting than these, but it just shows you what I'm thinking about, right? Maybe a lame fun fact, but one that's been on my mind, right? First 7 p.m. sunset here in the Northeast is coming up next week, so really excited
Nice.
about that. But also, we have here we actually have a pretty prominent cherry blossom festival in New York City, which is very cool. Speaking of conservation, and green space comes at quite a premium in New York City and all of that. But that's held at the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, which I think was one of the first botanical gardens in the United States. Really cool place. Highly recommend it for anyone who's ever checking stuff out. It's actually one of the big off the beaten path New York City things to do. Everyone wants to see, Empire State Building and all that, but actually the botanical gardens are one of the coolest areas, I think, and just home to a lot of cool. Speaking of biodiversity, right? Just tons of plants and stuff on display there, and they do a lot
Yeah,
of cool conservation efforts in New York City as well.
Yeah,
great.
so much to do there. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. There's always something.
Yeah, I love going to botanical gardens
Yeah.
in big cities because you're in this urban island, and then you go into this magical place that just transports you to some other. It's pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
maybe sets the stage for what we're talking about here and all of that. But I do the same thing. I don't think we ever talked about this, but like if I'm going to a new city and I've got like a day in between flights and stuff, if there's a botanical garden, that's like my number one thing I want to. I'm like I want to check out. I want to check out what flora, what fauna they have. Like, yeah, I'll do the touristy thing, but I'm always interested in the botanical garden collection wherever I
Yeah,
go.
yeah. That's a good idea. I think I should start doing that. I just need to get out more. I don't get
Yeah,
out as
same,
much these
right?
days.
Same.
Okay, well, moving on. So, Steve, the Nature Conservancy, they have a huge global impact. And I'm wondering how many of our listeners are maybe not that familiar with the Nature Conservancy, but can you just dive in and give, like, what is their mission statement, and how does that
Yeah.
tie into the critical work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, the Nature Conservancy is, we've been around a long time. I think 1951 was when the
Wow.
Nature Conservancy started, and it started out with the idea of how can we protect biodiversity? How
Yeah.
how can we protect the habitats? It's really got to focus on understanding habitats because that's where biodiversity persists. And so, it started out, with kind of like a land trust and buying land up.
Mm,
And then I think it was in 1989 we said, we need to do this globally, and it started to expand. That's actually when Conservation International. I think they started right up. There were some scientists with the Nature Conservancy that started Conservation International, and we have been working in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I think since like the mid '70s,
wow.
but I think in the '80s was when it started going more international. But the sole mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends. And we are focused right now on what we call the 2030 goals
Hmm.
and developing solutions to climate change, to biodiversity loss, and trying to like influence policy. Uh, it's an incredibly large organization. I think we work in 81 countries right now,
Wow.
and we do a lot of partnering. I'm one of probably 1,000 scientists with the Nature Conservancy. And these 2030 goals are very ambitious.
Right.
Things like reduce 3 gigatons of CO2 emissions yearly. We want to benefit 100 million people. Nature provides so many benefits to people. Anywhere from recreation and tourism
Hmm.
to coastal protection to food. fisheries productions, things like that.
Yeah.
And we want to conserve 10 billion acres of ocean space by 2030. So
Wow.
if you think about that, the continental U.S. is like 1.9 billion.
Yeah.
So it's like equivalent to 5 continental U.S.s that
Wow.
we're trying to set into some kind of protection and management space. So that's a big agenda, and we have a lot of partners. We couldn't get this done without the partners that we work with, but it's a mission that I've loved to be a part of, and yeah, I think we're entering some challenging times right now,
We are. Yeah.
and
Definitely.
we've fixed our sights on these goals, and we're not wavering. We're going to keep moving forward.
Good.
Well,
Good.
thank you for doing what you do. I think, I mean, I've known about the Nature Conservancy for a long time, but having this opportunity to talk to you and diving even deeper into the work that you guys do has been pretty inspiring for me. I was watching some YouTube
Yeah.
videos yesterday, just some of the work in the Caribbean and seeing the reclaiming of some of the beaches by putting those gabion kind of the
Gabion
rebar
baskets.
gabion baskets in the water and
Yeah.
creating that break and just trying to rehab the coastal areas there for because I mean those people just I can imagine how impactful that's been
Yeah.
on their way of life.
Yeah,
It's
we're really trying to bring what we call nature-based solutions to climate change impacts. So,
Right.
mhm,
how do we, if you have a beach that's eroding, we need to look at what's causing that erosion, and typically it's because the coral reef is dying and it's
Yeah.
covered with algae. The water quality isn't sufficient. There's too much fish that are being extracted,
mhm,
especially the parrotfish that help clean the algae from the coral.
right.
But what we really need to do is take a holistic look at, how can nature, because those coral reefs, there's been studies that those coral reefs attenuate up to like 97% of that wave energy.
Wow.
And so if we can rebuild the coral reef, let the coral come back, if we can replant mangroves that have been removed, that helps stabilize the coastline, that helps filter the runoff that goes into the ocean. The seagrass is
Mm,
very important for filtering water and provides nursery habitat for fish. All three of those habitats work together. And so we're trying to get governments to move away from concrete, gray
Yeah.
infrastructure like seawalls, and move towards natural solutions
Cool.
yeah,
and
Yeah.
invest in that. And plus, that is maintains itself, right?
Right.
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 Seawalls and stuff can break down and it needs maintenance. And it's a win-win situation. You're not only helping protect people, reduce flooding, you're helping increase the fish production, and you're increasing tourism, recreation benefits. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great all around solution.
That's so
yeah.
cool to hear. Yeah. Just you bring up a great point as we go into this because I think people high tech solutions can be very attractive, I think. And, we all love tech here, right? We'll get into all sorts of the tools we use, but I think it's really cool. And I think it's really important to often have like these nature based low tech solutions, right? Because
Oh yeah,
we can all watch this like fancy YouTube rendering of this crazy machine to clean ocean plastic and all of that. And that's cool. But these things need to be maintained, right? These people need to be able to maintain these systems. This can't be something that a company brings in and is some fancy machine that needs to be repaired by that group, right? People need to
yeah,
have stewardship over their solutions. So that's great to hear.
yeah. We need all hands on deck, all solutions. We need to do
Yeah.
this at multiple scales and
Right.
low tech, high tech. Yep, we need it all.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah. So how does this all translate to your day to day? Like, what does a day to day look like for you as the lead scientist for the Caribbean division?
Well, we're working on several projects at a time. The way we're funded, we write proposals and we get public funding, but then we also get private funding. We have a board that helps direct our work and helps us raise money for all the work that we need to do. Like right now, my team is probably working on anywhere between 14 and 16 projects. We have local scale projects, like for example, in the island of or the country of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, they're growing what we call sea moss. So sea moss is an algae that they can grow and has a lot of there's a lot of market value to this sea moss, not only pharmaceutical but also they use it in cosmetics, and they'll use it actually in food. You can buy a sea moss shake, and it's actually growing in popularity. So a lot of thinking of ways that we can get pressure off the fishing, like fishers are there. We need to find ways that they can make a living. Some
Right.
of them are going into honey production. I know someone in St. Lucia who started a really successful mangrove honey, and I highly encourage anyone who hasn't had
Mm,
mangrove honey to try that out.
wow.
Cool.
That's some awesome honey.
Yeah.
Growing sea moss. A lot of the women are their livelihoods. They'll go out and they'll set up strings and attach sea moss, and that actually attracts biodiversity. So it's something that can be done. And as a team in St. Vincent, we're actually siting areas using GIS that would be ideal for growing sea moss, because sea moss requires a certain amount of circulation, a certain amount of exposure, in these bays. So we can model that in GIS and make recommendations to the government on areas where seagrass could be cultivated. So that's an example of one of the projects. I just finished up a project in Jamaica where we mapped all the seagrass and mangroves for the entire island,
Wow.
and that took about a year. And we had hundreds of satellite scenes that we were using, and we spent 2 months going and doing transects and working with the fisheries department, working with the Environmental Protection Agency, dropping underwater cameras and evaluating where the seagrass was, what condition it was,
Cool.
flying drones over mangroves. So that's going from the sea moss is more of a local siting to we do national projects across an island like Jamaica, and then we're also working on projects across the region. So right now we're running this model to help us understand the regional connections within the Caribbean. And all the countries are doing their planning at the national scale, but they don't really have the resources to zoom out and look at how ocean currents connect. Like
Right.
Mm,
if coral reefs, the larvae that is produced from a certain spawning aggregation or spawning event, where is that where is that fish larvae going to travel? Because these countries depend on one another in terms of, the ocean's connected
Right.
ecologically. So we're trying to capture those important sources and sinks of larvae, and also marine mammal migrations, turtle migrations. Ecology doesn't pay any respect to national
national
boundaries.
Right.
borders, right?
Right.
Yeah, national borders. So we need to understand how things are connected, and so we're trying to bring information to the countries so they understand how they're dependent on one another, so they can better design a marine protected area that functions in the way it should. So
Cool.
I mean, those are some of the projects that we work on, and we're trying to answer, where are the habitats, where are the connections, what is the value of these habitats, and working with the countries to protect and restore mangrove, seagrass, and coral reefs are mainly what we work on.
Mm,
That's awesome. Well, you brought up a lot of what I wanted to ask you about next. Is you brought up that you're using drones. You brought up using satellites. Could you walk us through? I'm interested in hearing like your opinion of how it's changed over the years and what's improved there. So you said you started with probably Landsat based stuff about 20 odd years ago. That was your first foray into that. So what
Yep.
was that like?
Yeah. Well, this was going back to 2003. I remember one of the tasks at hand were to create a map of all the beaches of the Caribbean. And so how do we do that? Well, I mean, sign me up for that job. I could go visit,
No sweat,
go,
right? In
go
in
visit all the beaches. I could map them out. But we had to do this. We had to do this like in a 2 month period.
wow.
oh
And
wow.
so we tried to download all the best cloud free Landsat. And I had students that we hired, and we divided up the Caribbean, and they were in there digitizing all the
Wow.
bright, beaches, because there some areas are rocky shores, some areas are beach, some areas are
Sure.
mangrove. So we wanted to know specifically where the important turtle nesting beaches. So we were working with partners who knew where the turtles were laying their nests, and you know now, I mean, back then, 2003,
Yeah.
we just had, I think there were maybe two 1 meter satellites. There was probably
Right.
QuickBird and Iconos. So, and we had to buy that.
Yeah.
And so,
Hmm.
the Landsat was a 30-meter version, but it's nothing like the 1 meter version we could have got, but it did the job. But over time, we've had more and more satellite technology developments. I mean, Planet, we're really big partners with Planet, and
Cool.
they operate the largest satellite constellation right now, and we rely heavily on their doves. They've got the doves and the super doves. The super doves have been around since like 2021, but they have 8 multispectral bands, and
Mm.
that's what we're really using a lot because
Gotcha.
they're lined up like a string of pearls orbiting the Earth, and it's imaging the Earth every day.
Yeah.
And so you have this incredible high temporal frequency that you're able to sift through all the best scenes. If I want to look underwater, I need a scene that has no sun glint, has no clouds, has no turbidity. It can't be after a big rain event where you've got these
Hmm.
plumes that come out. It has to be calm. And so all the stars have to align to get an image like that. But
Right.
when you've got a satellite system mapping the Earth every day, you can find it. And that's what we did in Jamaica, where we were able to find satellite imagery. This is about a 4 meter spatial resolution. So you're going from a 30 meter to a 4 meter. And then we use, 1 meter and actually zero point 0.3 meter satellite data sets for local analyses. But it's been great to see this technology expand.
Yeah.
And just take advantage of it in the work that we're doing.
How much
Cool.
of that is there LiDAR in there as well, or is it mostly multispectral and
We Every once in a while we'll work in a country where they'll have a lidar data capture.
okay.
Like for example, Grenada had one, and we were able to use that to help model a mangrove habitats. That's very expensive, and it's
Hmm.
it's pretty rare
Mm.
to get lidar in the areas that we work. But if we have access to it, absolutely, we're going to take advantage of that. And lidar helps us better map the biomass. There's
Hmm.
Right.
there's there's infrared lidar, which helps us understand vegetation biomass. So that can really help us understand the above ground biomass of mangroves and how much carbon they're sequestering.
Hmm.
But there's also underwater lidar, which uses a blue green light that goes through water, and that helps us understand depth and helps us map reefs and be able to look at change over time. And another big use of lidar in the Caribbean is looking at beach erosion.
Hmm.
Where are beaches growing? Where are they accreting, and where are they eroding over time?
Cool.
Have you guys developed your own machine learning models for like calculating these biomasses, or is that tied into some other larger entity that creates those models, that already has those models to do those calculations?
Yeah, a lot of the above ground biomass estimates is already developed, and we go out and we take field measurements. And we try to correlate that with what we're sensing remotely. We do a lot of drone work. We don't have lidar or drone based lidar, but we'll do photogrammetry. So
Cool.
Got
we'll
it. Yeah.
we'll generate we'll generate these point clouds through stereo photos.
Yeah.
But one thing we are doing with AI is coral detection. So we're able to we've got an area exactly where you were swimming. That stretch from Buccaneer all the way out to East End
Yeah.
Marine Park.
Yeah.
That area has some amazing growth of a species called Acropora palmata, and it's a reef building species, and it grows very fast. And these acroporids are very sensitive to ocean temperatures.
Hmm.
So we've seen a lot of them die off in the last 2 years. Where we've had bleaching events. But our team down in St. Croix is doing an amazing job of going out and looking at what corals, understanding the genotypes and which species are more resilient to warming oceans.
Hmm.
And within one species, they're trying to proliferate those more resistant genotypes.
Huh.
And they'll take fragments and they'll cut them with a bandsaw. It's called microfragmentation, and they'll grow them in an on-land nursery to a certain point, and then they'll also have nurseries in the water where the reefs will grow, and then they'll outplant them onto the reef. And and then what we do is we go down and we want to see how the reef is changing. So drones are a perfect way. We fly about 200 feet above the water, and we'll use a really nice camera, and we'll be able to get 1 centimeter pixel,
Huh.
and we can sense down on a calm ocean day. We can sense down to about 3 meter depth, and
Cool.
and we can use machine learning to actually go in and detect individual colonies,
Wow.
and then we can do that twice a year, and we can get a map of where the colonies are, which ones are bleaching, which ones have recovered, which ones have died. And so it really gives us an information. And we've done this over about 16 linear kilometers of
Wow.
reef,
And
thousands of colonies.
that's amazing, and that's probably a pretty affordable, like relatively, right, data collector.
Oh
So
yeah.
you're using drones, you're using just vision, and everything else is
Yep.
on the back end. So I'm always happy to hear that. I'm always happy to hear when people get so much out of yeah, we love lidar, but the perfect example of how
Yeah.
much you're able to get just off of, let's call it, standard imaging.
Yeah. Yeah. For
uh,
our team, it's all about efficiency and
sure.
how can we apply the technology in the most cost effective way.
Do you feel though that there's any tool that you use in like a pretty specialized way that you haven't seen elsewhere? Or there's some tools, whether it's software or hardware, that you feel is like very specific to your work that people might not know about?
I mean, we've been doing a lot of work in underwater photogrammetry.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So there's drones that are flying and collecting stereo photos. We use fixed wings and multi rotors depending on where we are and the area we need mapped. But our we really got into underwater photography probably about it's been about 10 years. I think we've our first drone was 2014. We built this drone, and it was basically a flying Tupperware with a GoPro. It was like a
I,
GoPro 3
I think I
GoPro
saw that
3 that was
in a video
attached.
yesterday. It had like
That's
a
Yeah.
big
awesome.
plastic dome on top. I was like, what is
Exactly,
that thing?
exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, those were the early days. And then we were like, well, we need to understand better. You can only see so much when you're above the water. Let's go under the water. So a colleague and I, we built this what we call a surface drone, where we actually used some of the open source technology for drones, and we built it was basically a boogie board with
Mhm.
two little brushless motors on the back, and it essentially had a little chip inside that we could design an area that we wanted to map, and we put it in the water, and then we had a camera on the bottom that was just firing every second,
Cool.
and then it would follow a path. And we went through several designs. We published it like 5 years ago, but that's how we started developing these underwater mosaics. So now we can get really good detail and be able to detect even disease, and we can see how the coral reef's doing, even going down to the polyp level. Because
Cool.
if you're close enough to the reef and you have a good enough camera, you can build these underwater 3D mosaics that are just phenomenal for understanding the rugosity of the coral, the health. If there's predators, like we can detect things like fireworms, and really understand what's going on at a whole nother level from
Yeah.
where we were with the drone.
That is
Yeah.
so cool. So it's like an underwater orthomosaic. You're kind of producing that
Exactly.
stuff. So mostly top down, like surface vessel.
Yeah,
Kind of. That's
yeah,
so cool.
yeah. You can do it from the surface, and then you can also on scuba just
Sh-
keep track of where you are, and then you just take photos as you follow transects,
Cool.
and just have sufficient overlap, and then you develop these underwater mosaics that are really helpful for understanding reef health.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm gonna ask the last like in-depth, pun intended, question here. But
Yeah.
yeah, what software are you using on the photogrammetry end, or do you use a variety? Your own?
We use software called Pix4D.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a lot of.
Pix4D.
I think a lot of our listeners use that same as well.
Yeah,
That is awesome.
yeah. The nice thing about capturing it on the surface is that we can have a GPS that geotags the photos, and we're actually post kinematic processing
Right.
that coordinate because we have a
Hmm.
base station on the land that's tracking the GPS error. So we're able to get these geotags really precisely when you're underwater when you're on scuba and you're taking photos. You're not getting your geotags, right?
Sure.
So it takes much longer for the software to actually find those key points in the overlapping areas because they're not lined up, right?
Right.
So that's the advantage of doing it from the surface.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Did you realize when you left South Carolina that you would be doing robotics as part of your work too? Like, it sounds like you have
No,
a
I
little.
did not.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
no.
My last question maybe for you about like the tools there. Is there any tool that you feel like is like underutilized, like or one either you wish you had or one that you feel isn't being used enough, or like maybe just on the wish list? Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we're generating a lot of data, but our ability to extract information, I think, is limited,
Mm,
and I think that what I would like to see are more libraries developed, because if you think about it, if you go out and you fly a drone on any one day, your conditions are going to be different.
yeah.
So that same coral you're trying to detect can look differently. There can be sediment in the water, or there can be cloud cover, or the sun is going to be a different angle, or the tide is going to be different, or the wave energy is going to be different. So I would love to see developing these libraries. Maybe somehow crowdsourcing people, putting this on the internet and having people say, "Hey, you want to help us map coral?
Yeah.
Okay, well let's contribute to this library of learning." And so they can be trained in how to recognize what a coral looks like, and they go and digitize it. And then if we are able to digitize enough training data in different conditions, then we can go out there and fly drones whenever we want, and it's going to be detected because it's been recognized in some condition.
Yeah.
uh, the good conditions, the bad conditions. The Hopefully we're not flying drones in bad conditions, but I think that's really the future, is developing these libraries that are species specific.
Right.
We have the detail. We're getting 1 centimeter detail. We can see the difference between a cropper palmata versus like a pseudodiploria, one of those brain corals.
Hmm.
And the pseudodeplorias are the ones that have actually resisted a lot of these warming bleaching events and have done better than the acroporids. And so we need libraries to be able to identify all these different species and understand what's going on.
Mm. Yeah, it's not all that. I mean, it's obviously different on land, but there's the amount of data being collected just globally right now, whether it's from satellite imagery or whether it's from more airplane-based systems or drones or underwater. Like it doesn't sound like it's any different for the work that you're doing, that there's just copious amounts of data
Yep.
being collected and helping building up these libraries, as you were talking about. Just like, how do we get more uh, ways of interpreting and analyzing this data? Because it's a lot of times, like in the work that we do, we might be working with an architect or say an engineer. It's like we have all this incredible point cloud data where you have millions of points of data from one data set, and there's so much that you can do with that. And particularly if it's lidar and you have all the different returns from the lidar data that you can get. So I think people are, and AI is playing a big role in this, of how do we get the most out of this data that we're producing, because there's so much of it. And I think
That's
Yeah.
that
that's the question that haunts all of us. Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
I
we've got
know.
data not being used.
Yeah, the technology, I think the hardware and the software have been growing together, because if you have hardware that has so many more capabilities than you're able to extract out of it, then it's just like, well, this is just a really expensive piece of equipment
Yeah.
that we're not able to interpret what's going
Yeah.
on with all the
Yeah.
collecting we're doing. So fascinating, and I think that GIS is playing a role in that too. Maybe not so much the machine learning, but I feel like the way that GIS has been used historically, whether it's primarily a government agency program because it was this big, difficult thing to understand, steep learning curve, but because it's become more and more intuitive to use. I think more and more institutions, private institutions, are using GIS to implement, to bring, like, you have this three-dimensional place-based database that you can aggregate all of this information. So we've definitely talked about it on a few occasions so far, but both Scott and I are huge GIS enthusiasts. We're both self-taught, but
Yep.
like extremely passionate about GIS because it brings in that mapping component, and even just like as a cartographer and thinking about all of the things that you could do with GIS to express ideas, express patterns,
Yeah.
and do all these things. It's just an amazing tool. So I'm curious how. I mean, you've mentioned a few ways that you're using GIS so far, but like how is it being leveraged? How could you see it being even utilized more with the work that you're doing, and just kind of tying into that
Yeah.
data component that you were just talking about?
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian, Category 5, just ravaged the islands of Grand Bahama and Abaco in the northern Bahamas, and the damage to the mangroves there was extensive.
Mm,
And we went there, 3 years after the hurricane, and there was little recovery. And we developed this tool. Our team developed this tool to understand where mangroves are recovering and where they're not recovering. And the only way to do that is, first off, you have to have your footprint of where mangroves are. So we had that.
hmm
Then we took advantage of Google Earth Engine, which has an extensive archive of satellite imagery, and then we could run these vegetation indices in the areas where the hurricane had affected these mangroves, and we were able to calculate, looking at the absorption of the red light versus the reflection of the infrared light. That's where photosynthesis happens, right?
hmm
When a plant is photosynthesizing, it's absorbing blue and red light, and it's reflecting infrared light. And so by generating these normal difference vegetation indices, we're able to see over time the greening up of the mangroves and where the areas that they were not. I mean,
Huh.
it was still they were still struggling to grow back. And so developing this tool called Blue Carbon Explorer, we were able to help identify those areas. And then we were able to use space-based radar data from the TerraSAR-X. That's a 12-meter product. We could identify the height of the mangroves,
mm
and then the way mangroves naturally regenerate. The propagules on these red mangroves, the propagules grow on the trees and they drop off and they'll float and they'll start a new mangrove. Right? It's one of the few tree species in the world where the baby tree is actually growing on the mother tree
huh.
before it gets heavy enough and it drops off, and it can float, or maybe it just sticks in the mud and it starts to grow into a new mangrove. So we wanted to know where the tall mangroves are and where the short mangroves are, because the short mangroves weren't producing the propagules.
Right.
And so using that radar data, we could detect, where's the scrub mangrove, which there's a lot of in the northern Bahamas because it's in the northern limits of the mangrove growth zone. But and so using GIS, we were able to not only model where mangroves were recovering, but the potential for propagation. And so isolating those areas is now where many local groups from the Bahamas, there's the Mangrove Alliance in the Bahamas, that they're
Yeah.
actually planting mangroves in those areas where recovery is going to take a really long time
Yeah,
because
Wow.
it's so far away from the source
right.
of the propagules. So That's an interesting example of how we're using GIS to answer a question:
Yeah,
where's the best place to plant mangroves where we're going to have the most influence?
That's
that is
awesome.
so cool. That's a great one.
How
Go
is
for it.
this just being shared? I know that there's lots of different databases that exist in different municipalities, different organizations. Like, is there an effort that you see to, for the work that you're doing? Is it more just aggregated within your organization? Obviously, you have lots of connections with all these other groups and nonprofits and government agencies, but I'm just wondering, is there like a global or at least a regional GIS database that's attempting to bring all of this into one place and then have it be available for people to consume at a more public level if they're just generally interested, or used as a tool for educating people? And like, I just, because I see
Yeah,
this, I see this happening as GIS becomes more commonplace. You do have all this siloed information, but the whole
yeah,
intent of it is to bring it together. So what does that look like?
yeah. That is a constant challenge, and especially in the Caribbean, the each country develops their own data, and the spectrum is very wide in terms of their ability to have resources to do the mapping they need and maintain these data sets.
Hmm.
Um, there's nothing really at the regional scale that's comprehensive. There's groups that have thematic specialties like climate, or maybe they'll look at risk, like risk reduction and understanding disasters. So we're the Nature Conservancy actually is actively trying to bring regional entities together, bring national entities together, roll up data sets where they can be, and we make all those available on the Caribbean Science Atlas.
Mm.
So we have a landing spot. But the Nature Conservancy also does their own management. We're managing all the lands, especially in the U.S. jurisdictions, understanding where all the preserves are, and the land that the TNC manages. But from an international scale, we're trying to understand what we call the portfolios of biodiversity, where are the important areas that governments need to be focused on to reaching those goals that I talked about earlier in
Yeah.
terms of biodiversity. Where
Yeah.
where are the areas not only important for biodiversity but for people benefits,
Right.
and understand, because those may not be the same locations, right? Sometimes they are, and if they are, that's a really valuable area
Right.
to protect and manage. So there's data management is always a challenge, and we try to do it at multiple scales. But all of the data that my team works with is all available on that Caribbean Science Atlas. And we've been doing this 20 years, gathering data from different countries, and we actively work with governments to, when there's a new marine protected area declared, we help them gazette those areas. The Bahamas just did a large expansion of marine protection a few years ago, and we're helping them map all that. And so it's a constant challenge, but
Yeah.
it's a challenge we welcome, and we continue to try to improve. Yeah,
Right. Well, the era of big data is here, and I
yeah,
think, well, I think that term maybe not the right term. Like, big data has a certain connotation to it, but I think there is, just with all these tools, there is so much more. And I mean, I feel like GIS is going to be a really important tool for educating and just being
Yeah.
a part of people's day-to-day lives. I mean, for, I mean, Google
oh
Earth is
yeah,
a GIS database, so people like don't understand, maybe like, well, GIS, that's a new term for me, but like Google Earth is a GIS system, and it just is a way
yeah,
of viewing and analyzing information that's place based and on a map, and then you can see these broader patterns. I like how you were talking earlier about, ecosystems don't have national boundaries, and a lot of these
yeah,
can be expressed and analyzed with these bigger platforms and these systems like GIS, to just really understand something that might seem obscure, but once you overlay all these different layers, you really can start to see the patterns develop. So I think that's awesome.
yeah. No, Google Earth. That I remember when it was Keyhole. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that was, I think, before 2005.
yeah,
Yep.
and
That's
and I remember seeing a job opening at Keyhole in San Francisco, And I was talking to my wife. I was like, man, there's this new little company called Keyhole, and they have this
Yeah.
awesome platform, and that was back when they had just completed the Landsat Global Mosaic,
Yeah.
and then the SRTM data had just been captured. So we had the first time we had an ability to go virtually anywhere in the world with the elevation that was captured by the shuttle radar topography mission, along with the global Landsat mosaic, and that was a big event in the GIS world.
Hmm.
And then to put that into a cool interface like Keyhole,
Yeah.
and then Google bought it, and
Yep.
and they've kind of taken off with it. So
Yeah.
that's
Amazing
that's an
tool.
awesome
Yeah.
example, yeah, of how
Yeah.
this technology progresses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the and man, I could nerd out about the history of Keyhole with you for
Oh,
for
cool.
hours probably, but I'm gonna jump over that part. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting because we're talking about these tools and seeing these changes, and I think you have a pretty unique insight because you probably more than most people have seen how the Caribbean has changed both physically, variety. You're talking about hurricane events. What do you think are some of the most major changes you've seen over your 20 odd years there? Whether it's culturally or physically, just like
Yeah.
what do you think is different in your day to day now than it used to
Well,
be?
yeah, the culture's just awesome. The food is awesome. That hasn't changed much, but what has changed is the loss of coral
Mhm.
reef. A lot of that's due to the warming of the oceans. The 60%, I think, is the latest estimate on what you see these pictures of, like Discovery Bay, Jamaica, back in the 70s, with these incredible stands of
Mhm.
elkhorn coral. And with the latest bleaching event, a lot of those have suffered losses. Mass tourism is increasing. That is the bread and butter. It's the economic engine of the Caribbean. So it's how do you balance the demands of tourism at the same time maintain a healthy environment? That's always going to be a challenge. And and one of the neat things that I've seen over the years is the investment into protection. And in 2008, TNC started the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, where we were trying to get countries to protect 20% of their nearshore space. And we used GIS and spatial technologies to help identify that. And 11 countries signed on to that challenge. And now there's the 30 by 30 agenda, the global agenda, and we're working with countries to try to expand to 30%. Now, some countries, rather than expand marine protection, they want to enhance management in what they already have,
Mhm.
which is fine. Bahamas is doing that. They've declared 20%. There's new finance mechanisms to get money. There's the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which lets money flow to countries who need resources to carry out management and monitoring of these protected areas, so they're not just paper parks. That's
Right.
that's one of the big things, is a lot of these parks are declared, but then there's no active management or
Mm.
enforcement.
Mm.
And so getting funding, the Nature Conservancy is involved in debt restructuring. They'll go in and take on the sovereign debt, and working with a variety of financial partners, they'll renegotiate that debt at a
Mm.
reduced rate. And a lot of that money that's saved is directed toward things like conservation. That's what we're currently doing in
Yeah.
Barbados and the Bahamas and Belize. So there's new ideas out there, and there's new opportunities for funding which is what we
Yeah.
need to be able to
Yeah.
solve this problem. And there's more awareness being raised, about the blue economy and the need to grow the economy, but at the same time protect the environment. That's
Yeah.
that's the challenge. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You were
it's changed a lot.
you were mentioning the tourism piece. Like, how much of ecotourism have you seen take a bigger bite out of that pie, as far as people that are coming there for those reasons?
Yeah, that's a specialized niche, and I'd like to see more of that.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, I've seen more of the cruise ship
Mhm.
and the all inclusive development, which I mean that's part of the economy, but it's we need to do it in a build out this economy in a smart way that doesn't
Yeah.
have the impact and the challenges that we're seeing right now, especially with things like sargassum. Sargassum has been a headache for tourism. So that's the floating seaweed that has been growing in abundance.
Hmm.
It grows in the Sargassum Sea, and then it drifts into the islands, and you'll see it pile up.
Mm.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
that's a big, the impact that's having not only on tourism but also ecology. Like when turtles are trying to lay their eggs, and you've got all this sargassum, and you know that that's a big challenge to deal with.
Yeah. And what?
So we're seeing a lot of changes like that.
Yeah. And is that? I'm sure there's complex reasons behind that, but is that attributable to warming oceans? Is there a
That
root
that
cause?
is
That, yeah.
that is the theory that with the warming oceans, potentially more nutrients
Mm,
available in the water column. Those sargassums are blooming. They're growing a lot more because
uh,
this has only been happening in the last 10 years or so.
huh.
These increases in sargassum and the amount that we're seeing, um, and it poses a really really big challenge, especially for the tourism industry.
Mm.
Yeah. Wow.
Uh, are there aspects of the work that you've done in the Caribbean that have had broader impacts on other parts of the world? Like some of the work that you guys have done has been applied to, say, something on the Great Barrier Reef or vice versa. How, like, I'm sure information is
Yeah,
shared within the Nature Conservancy, but how your work specifically, has it grown and been applied in other areas?
yeah. So what we were doing in the Caribbean, specifically with drone mapping and understanding where to restore corals, and coral have certain criteria. So when we grow these micro fragments from the coral in the either in the inland on land nursery or the in water nurseries,
Mm-hmm.
we need to know where to put those, right? And so there's a number of criteria. We want to have a certain amount of live coral cover. We want to have a certain amount of rugosity or reef structure. We want to have a certain amount of fish in the water. We want to have, a certain amount of depth range. We want a certain amount in the back reef or the fore reef. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and we've developed a model to help coral restoration practitioners, use GIS to answer that question.
Mm.
And I had the opportunity of going to Tahiti last year and working with an organization called Coral Gardeners to go in and map some of these. Yeah, yeah, hard assignment going to Tahiti to fly drones.
Well, I was sitting here
Um,
thinking, Steve, if you ever need
yeah,
a wingman, hey,
exactly. So,
I
but the reefs there just blew my mind. I mean, I've spent all this time in Caribbean reefs, but going out there and seeing the amazing diversity and how much
mm,
live coral there was really invigorating. And we flew a third of the island, and we mapped, and then we brought it back and worked on extracting where all the live coral was, and we can also develop depth maps with that,
mm,
Cool.
using that point cloud. And so they're using that to be able to cite where are the best places to take these fragments and outplant them onto the reef. And so that's an example of something that we thought about, and then we're sharing with a place on the other side of the world, and
that's
it's
amazing.
working well.
Yeah, that is amazing. Having spent, a fair amount of time in the Caribbean myself, I have a sense of the culture and the ecosystems there. But is there something that you wish people knew more about the Caribbean? Like, and again, like just trying to foster this conservation mindset. Like, what would you like people to know about the Caribbean?
Um, you know, just the incredible diversity that exists. I mean, this region, I think the only other place on earth like it is the Mediterranean,
Mm-hmm.
where we've got so many countries, English, Spanish, French, Dutch, Haitian, Creole. I mean, all these different languages that are spoken. different cultures. They all depend on one sea. These countries range from, St. Kitts and Nevis, one of the smallest, youngest countries in the Western Hemisphere, probably 40,000 people. You know, we did a marine spatial plan for that island nation back in 2010, I think it was. One of the very first marine spatial plans for the whole country. And that's
Wow.
been a case study for a lot of other countries following.
Yeah.
But, the Caribbean has a lot of history, a lot of diversity. Um, when you compare it, I mean, people think of it as just a bunch of small islands,
Hmm.
right? But Cuba, if you take Cuba and you turn it on its end, it's the length of California.
Oh wow.
I
Yeah.
mean, it is incredibly long,
Yeah.
long island, and if you look at the ocean space, if you take the exclusive economic zones of all these islands in the insular Caribbean and you overlay it, it takes up about at least half of the continental U.S. I
Wow.
mean, and we're starting to refer to them more and more as small island, big ocean
Mm.
states.
Hmm.
A lot of them is that these are small island nations, but they're small island, big ocean. Um, like Barbados, I mentioned this before. Their ocean space is 400 times larger than their land space.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So you know these are things that people need to understand that this is a significantly large area when you're considering the marine environment, and there's just an amazing amount of endemism.
Mm.
Like in Jamaica, for example, there's I'm probably going to get this right, but 23 endemic birds. They're only found there.
Mm.
If you
Mm.
go to the island, the nation of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, and you go to Union Island, Union Island, you can walk around in probably, I don't know, an hour. It's a very small island, and it's got this beautiful bay called Chatham Bay, and in that bay there is an endemic species of gecko,
Mm.
and
Cool.
it is one of the most beautiful lizards that I have ever seen. And because of that, it has attracted the black market trade,
Mm.
and people are going to find it. So the government is trying to protect it. Hurricane Beryl came through and did tremendous damage to that area. So they're still trying to understand the effects of that. But if you've got an island that occurs in a bay on a small island, and that lizard doesn't occur anywhere else in the world, that tells you something. There's something very unique
Yeah.
Yeah.
to that area. So there's a lot of endemism and culture and richness that I learn something new every day,
Yeah.
and I love being part of it.
So we've mentioned the hurricanes several times now, and I actually had a friend who lived on St. John. When was it the same Dorian? Was that the Cat 5 that came through and just ravaged
Probably Maria. That
Maria?
was probably
Okay, that
Maria.
I think you're
Maria or
right.
Irma.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
hearing her stories, like she was an emergency responder on the island, and just hearing her stories of when that thing came through, I mean, it was like sounded really scary. But are you seeing an exodus of the islands, and maybe, and I would imagine it's less the more of the native people of the islands as opposed to people that have kind of resettled there. Are you
Yeah.
seeing like a migration of people in and out of the islands as a result of just these changing weather patterns?
It's interesting, the younger generation, they're looking for opportunities, and a lot of them will leave and look for opportunities beyond the island. But I've also noticed that there's a lot of people that, once they've had their career, they'll move to U.S. or Canada, and there's a longing to return, and they'll come
Mm.
back.
Mm.
So there's an influx of people coming. Generally, they're retired, and they're from the Caribbean. They want to come back, but
Hmm.
at the same time, the younger generation, wants to explore economic opportunities outside the island, and
Yeah.
and some of them stay. But I think there's both. So I think hurricanes are part of Caribbean living,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
it's part of what people have grown up with. They do seem to be getting stronger, and that's
Hmm.
what we worry about, the frequency of them. So, whether or not that's causing people to leave, I don't know. People still keep moving to Florida,
Yeah, it's
So
true.
right.
Yeah,
so
it's
Good
yeah,
point.
so
Good
true.
point.
Well, my own
So,
aspirations, I I see myself living in the Caribbean. Like when
yeah,
I'm about to be 50, so it's not quite at retirement age yet, but I would like to have the Caribbean be a part of my life,
yeah.
in the years to come. And
What
it's,
island?
oh man, I don't know. That's a tough question. Maybe I'll ask you, what island should I go to,
Yeah.
Steve?
I mean,
What?
I mean, Dominican Republic is a place I think that has some of the most amazing sea and landscapes.
Yeah,
That's where I was talking about the mountains of Hispaniola. I mean, I really like the people, the culture.
yeah.
That's a place that I could really enjoy. Another island that I just love is Saint Lucia.
Oh
mm,
yeah.
Saint Lucia and Dominica are both beautiful islands that I've really enjoyed getting to know.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be, it's a hard choice, but I think there's,
Yeah,
there's people that are thinking about, maybe there's economic opportunities as well. Like if you're still want to be there and work and be a part of the communities there, like I just, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know. I'm so connected to the ocean that I think I'm more comfortable in the water than I am on
yeah.
land. And
yeah.
I have this,
Sounds
even
like it.
though I'm in Portland and the ocean's an hour and a half away, it's a different ocean here, and it's amazing in its own right. Like I've spent some time diving in the down in Catalina, and that was amazing with all the
I
kelp and
bet.
just like, oh my gosh. But yeah, just every time I visit the ocean and I'm spending time in it, I I feel like what I gotta like what I need to get back. I need to get back in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
more permanent way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, as someone who, so I've been to the Bahamas once, and I agree with Mike that there's just a certain draw to the area that's just so fascinating, and you're giving me great inspiration for where I should check out next and where to go to.
Awesome.
But I think a good question that you brought up, and I'm speaking this as someone who, yeah, came as a tourist, right? And you're talking about, yeah, that there's ecotourism, and you're seeing that pick up, but there's also a lot of, let's just say, harmful or tourism with negative consequences. What is there something that you wish you could tell someone who like is a tourist going, of like what you should not necessarily like go here, don't go there, but like what, I don't know, do you feel there's more sustainable choices that tourists can make as they go, and
Absolutely.
there's anything
Yeah,
that you've got some insight to that you would recommend? Because now that's what you've got me thinking about, that of like, okay, if I'm
yeah.
visiting, what should I know, what should I strive
There's
for?
so many resources out on the internet, and I think you can look at the reviews and the certification. There's
Mm,
there's different green certification levels. You have
sure.
to be careful though, because there is a lot of greenwashing, and
Mm,
but I think you need to do your due diligence and
Hmm.
just research where you're going. A lot of people, you know, all they want to do for on a vacation is just to go lay on a beach, read a book, which that's totally fine. Others, there's opportunities you can go and you can help. Like my daughter and I went down
yeah.
to Grenada, and we were able to help with this organization in Grenada that monitors turtles.
Hmm.
And we were able to walk the beaches at night, and we actually had three turtles come on shore, two leatherbacks, and then there was actually an olive ridley, which is pretty rare,
Oh wow.
laying eggs, and we're able to count the eggs as the mother was laying the eggs, and then we were able to help take measurements and mark it.
Cool.
And there's opportunities where you can kind of contribute. There's actually organizations that, if you're into diving, you can help
Yeah.
with the coral restoration work.
Hmm.
Cool.
There's always beach cleanups you can get involved with when you're on we're on vacation. There's a lot of opportunities out there. I mean, you can reach out to um, we have 7 offices throughout the Caribbean, and wonderful staff that can give advice. And we're found on nature.org. You can find all of our information there. But I think if you look for opportunities to try to give back and help, you'll find it. And so just do your due diligence on where you're staying, and you know just keep in mind all those things that we're taught. We've been taught since elementary school.
Yeah.
Reduce, reuse,
Yeah.
recycle, and
Wouldn't
and
that
try to
be,
make our footprint
yeah,
as less as possible.
wouldn't that be an amazing shift in mindset of every vacation you took,
Yeah.
you dedicate one day to serving the community in some sort of like restoration effort, or even if it's helping feed people that, I just think
Yeah.
like have some stewardship as part of every vacation. Like how
Yeah.
we should name this something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think that's a
I
beautiful idea to just, yeah, of
Definitely.
course you work hard and you want to go vacation and relax, but I think there is so much you gain out of
yeah.
helping in other ways, and it still feels like a vacation even though it's just a
Oh,
different
Yeah.
experience.
absolutely.
Exactly.
And I think people want to do that. They just don't know where to look, and
Yeah.
and
And
so
yeah,
yeah.
I think also it happens a little too. I'm just speaking from personal experience. Like it almost happens too late, right? You plan a vacation, you plan this typical vacation, you go there, and then you're there, and you're like, man, what can I do, right? So I'm really glad you shared. You're on nature.org, you said, and that's
Yeah.
great. The concept of reaching out to one of your offices ahead of time, I think, is such a great idea. Like just including that in the vacation planning process,
Yeah.
because yeah, I mean, I assume that's a lot easier to coordinate with people when they reach out ahead of time. Yeah, it's difficult when someone just shows up and says, hey, I'm on
Yeah.
vacation, I'm here two
Yeah.
more days. But scheduling it around your trip sounds like a great idea.
Exactly. Yeah. And the office in St. Croix, if you ever go there, there is an amazing coral innovation hub that
Cool.
Mm.
that we've set up, and you can go and you can see the coral growing and learn all about the work that's being done there. It's fascinating, and it's for all ages. They do tours. Um, so yeah, I
Yeah.
highly recommend that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and speaking of, bringing your kids, like having those experiences with your kids, I think just fosters this sense of stewardship. And, I have teenagers,
Absolutely.
so I would love those kinds of opportunities to, hey, we're going on
Nice.
vacation, but we're going to spend a day working in the local community, or we're going to be out in the water helping replant coral. Like that'd be amazing. All right. Well, we had a question on here about the loss and damage fund, but I feel like it maybe is we're headed down a path, and unless you feel like
Yeah.
there's compelling information there that you want to share, otherwise we can just kind of maybe
No, not. I
just
mean, just the fact that we mainly invest in nature-based solutions.
yeah,
So that's what we're really encouraging. If there's money that countries get from the Loss and Damage Fund, let's invest that in restoration of coral reefs and mangroves and seagrass.
got it. Yeah.
And then we do a lot of. I don't know if you've heard about the reef insurance
Mm-mm.
programs, like countries like Belize and Hawaii recently have taken out insurance policies on their reefs, and
Huh.
so when storms come through and the reef is damaged, they'll get funds to help rebuild and restore the reef,
Oh, that's
which
interesting.
is a yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So those are interesting solutions.
Yeah. Scott, maybe before we jump off here, I have one completely random question for you, Steve, and
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm
Right.
wondering if you have the answer. So uh, I mentioned that before we jumped on, like I honeymooned on Rotan,
yeah.
and we spent 3 weeks there. So it was a dive, it's a big dive destination. So we got
Oh
our
yeah.
advanced dive certification, and part of that advanced certification, as you know, but maybe other people don't, you have to do a night dive. So we were diving at night, and our dive instructor had 30 years in the water and had never seen what we saw this night, so she was perplexed. She's
Really.
like, I have no idea what this was, but it was like a 6 foot long gelatinous worm, that was just like floating in the water, and we had our lights
What?
shining on it, and she just reached out like close to it, and as soon as her finger got close, the whole thing just exploded in this puff of smoke. Like it, and it wasn't smoke, but like it just exploded, and we're all like, what the heck was that? So nobody really knew
Wow.
what it was, and I'm curious if you do.
Six. I mean, these are things that when I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons with my
Yeah,
Yeah.
kids,
I was
these
gonna say this is a Michael Crichton question more than a.
this is like I'm thinking this is a gelatinous cube in the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. No, it was like the diameter
Wow,
of I don't know, maybe it was like a half-inch diameter, just
Wow.
like worm kind of thing that was about 6 feet long.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mystery.
wow.
Yeah.
And it just kind of when it was touched. Well, first off, the number one rule in diving is you're not supposed to touch
Right,
things,
don't
right?
touch. Yeah, right.
so,
Yeah.
so um, and then it just kind of vanished.
It just like when it like dispersed, almost like it was a long like tube sack of some sort of sperm or something that
Huh.
just kind of
Huh.
like went out into this. I don't know.
I,
It was
I, I,
fascinating.
wow. Have you done your Google research and tried to figure out what it
I
might
think
be?
I did back, a few years ago, and then, nothing really gave us a
Huh.
definitive answer. So
Huh.
I was actually, when I mentioned Catalina, I was down there there was this family camp, and it was through Jean-Michel Cousteau's The Ocean Futures
Wow. Yeah.
program. So we were there with Jean-Michel and Dr. Richard Murphy, and I asked
Huh.
him if he knew what it was, because I don't know if you know who Dr. Murphy is in
I've
that
heard. I've
organization.
heard him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was asking him the question. He's like, I don't know. So,
I don't know if that's some kind of larvae that um,
That is.
I don't know. The jellies, do they have,
yeah,
are those all baby jellies that are
yeah,
all
maybe they just
together? I
somehow
Oh
don't know.
aggregated together. Anyway, all
Yeah.
right.
It
Well,
was about 6 feet long.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
The
Wow.
mystery
Yeah.
Well,
continues.
I'll
Yeah, I
I'll
feel like
I'll ask.
it feels to me a Long Island tradition that something washes up ashore that is usually
Yeah.
half the time it's a decayed raccoon, to be honest, or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's always a
Yeah.
story in the news about some monster that washed up. And it does go to show you though, like one, people's imagination and just how much the ocean is an unknown thing to us, but
Yeah,
also that there's so much biodiversity that you don't know it's the fact
Yeah.
that there is all this these incredible creatures, all this incredible diversity that makes even the more wilder things,
Yeah. I
it's what
mean,
attracts people.
even in the Caribbean, we're discovering new species. I mean, when
Yeah.
we set up the first marine protected area in Haiti on the northern shore up there by Cape Haitian, in Fort Liberté, that's some of the most beautiful reef are right outside that area. But when we set that up and we did the ecological assessment, there was a new species of hamlet. That's a fish
mm,
that was discovered, and that was exciting. They had a publication on it, and
Cool.
so there are new things that we're discovering
yeah.
all the time. So
Awesome.
That's amazing,
Awesome.
amazing. Well,
Cool.
we like to end each episode with, I don't call it a call to action, or just really something that inspired you that you think would be beneficial for people to hear. It could be, maybe it was a book you read that it really inspired you, or an article, or a show, or an experience you had. Uh, is there something that throughout
yeah,
your lifetime that has just been really impactful that you want to share, to just get people activated, and also too, we want to let people know how they can get involved with the Nature Conservancy. So
yeah,
maybe lump those together if you.
absolutely, yeah. Well, I say this often when I talk about my work is nature always surprises you, and I've had many instances in my field work that I've done where I've been surprised at the health given the conditions. Like I was talking about that work in Haiti we were doing, and
Hmm.
in 2019 I went into an area. It's called Barader Kayamit in the southern peninsula of Haiti, an incredibly rich marine area, and I didn't know what to expect. We were going down there to map all the different habitats down to about a 30-meter depth, and we were using satellite imagery and we were using drop cameras and drones. And the first day that I got on the boat with a fisher and we went out to this area and I dropped my camera down, I was blown away. I'll have to share the video with you.
Sure.
Yeah, please do.
But at the amount of diversity and the health of the reef, like these reefs were being overfished, but at the same time they were very healthy. There was a ton of live coral. There was probably about 12 or 13 coral reef species we were seeing,
Mm.
and and things like that. I've had whales show up in areas where the captain hasn't seen a whale in 20 years.
Oh,
you know
wow.
so
Yeah.
I mean it's just amazing the way nature can surprise you, and that if you give nature a chance, if you send it in a direction where you set up some kind of management, and you do your efforts to try to reduce some of the potential impacts, nature will recover.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of that during COVID. you know people were people had to stand out, and we were seeing species, dolphins, show up, and turtles show up in areas that generation had never seen before.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's amazing. Don't underestimate the power of nature, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that if you want to get involved with TNC, there's lots of things you can do. You can get involved with local conservation. You can donate. You can volunteer. There's lots of volunteers. You can attend events. Tomorrow, up at one of the resorts, they're having a climate change meeting, kind of a venue for public to come and
Mhm.
talk about some of the climate issues here. And TNC is sponsoring that. You can get involved in pledges, support politicians
Yeah.
who support conservation initiatives. You can visit a preserve. There's lots of TNC preserves out there, and just be an advocate for nature. Those are
Yeah.
those are my
Cool.
suggestions.
Those are good
Awesome.
ones. That's fantastic. Yeah, Steve, it has been an absolute
Oh
pleasure
yeah,
having you on and hearing about all of your work and just the impact that you're having. I can't thank you enough.
absolutely. I think this is the most educational hour
Wow.
plus I've had in all
Wow.
week easily, if not all month.
Well,
So I really
it's been
appreciate it.
you bet. It's been a pleasure talking and getting to know you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Well, best of luck out to you out there in the field and doing the critical work you do. And I'll say it again. If you ever need a wingman,
Absolutely, yeah.
Make that
I'm sure
double.
Scott or I would love.
Yeah.
Scott's got the East Coast covered. I got the West Coast
There you
covered.
go.
So we're here to help, and we're both extremely passionate about using this platform as a way that we can raise awareness and have these tools that we all use. That technology is a part of the solution. So it was really great to hear how you guys are using it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for setting up the platform
Yeah, you bet.
and
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 thanks.
getting the message out.
All right.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Okay, you bet.